God, I think you're wrong. No lightning bolts. That's one of the key core pieces of this story that we're going to hear as we continue this semi-continuous story of Genesis. So what we're going to read for today follows immediately after what we just heard, the story of Abraham showing hospitality to God and a couple of other guys, and then God letting Abraham and Sarah know that Sarah is going to get pregnant and give birth to a son in about a year. So then the story picks up immediately after that. Then the three men who visited Abraham set out from there, and they looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them on their way. Yahweh said, Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing that Abraham shall become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? No, for I have chosen him, that he may charge his children and his household after him to keep the way of Yahweh by doing justice and righteousness, so that Yahweh may bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. Then Yahweh said, How great is the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, and how very grave their sin. I must go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know. So the men turned from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham remained standing before Yahweh. Then Abraham came near and said, Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not forgive it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? And Yahweh said, If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will forgive the whole place for their sake. Abraham answered, Let me take it upon myself to speak to my Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. Again he spoke to him, Suppose 40 are found there. He answered, For the sake of 40, I will not do it. Then he said, Oh, do not let my Lord be angry if I speak. Suppose 30 are found there. He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. He said, Let me take it upon myself to speak to my Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. He answered, For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, Oh, do not let my Lord be angry if I speak just once more. Suppose 10 are found there. He answered, For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And Yahweh went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. Well, as always, there is so much to be curious about in this story. For one, it's always good to remember that in the Hebrew Scriptures and the Bible in general, we never hear only one voice throughout the whole thing, only one perspective. It's a collection of things written by many different people over many different eras and generations with their own agendas, their own perceptions, their own ideas. And so this is a little bit striking from what we generally think about with God appearing in the Scriptures. Yahweh appears to Abraham in the heat of the day, and nobody freaks out. It just apparently Yahweh showing up as if you could mistake him for just a guy. There's no burning bush. There's no whirlwind, just 3 men who show up. One of them, apparently, is Yahweh, and the other 2 are, who knows? The author never actually uses the word angels. They are messengers, perhaps, but not necessarily otherworldly creatures. But this idea of God just showing up seems to have changed over the generations. And Abraham is definitely respectful, but he doesn't just throw himself on his face and grovel. He just gets Sarah and his servant to throw together a quick feast for these three men. Some scholars propose that in some of these Hebrew stories, the original version of the story had God showing up, kind of like we have here, in a more or less intimate, normal sort of way. But over time, later editors and folks who shaped these stories seem to have thought to themselves, oh, well, we can't have God just doing these things. We've got to send someone in God's place. We've got to send angels. We've got to send messengers of God who show up. And so they sort of add on to the story, but without actually replacing the part that says that God was there. And we get that sort of here as well, where we have these three men who are setting out for Sodom, but then two of them go on, and one stays behind, who turns out to be Yahweh. And then we hear that Yahweh says, I must go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know. One can imagine a later editor having the idea, well, we can't have Yahweh going into Sodom with all the ick that's going to happen there. So Yahweh stays behind as the other two go on. Also, over the generations, we've added all of these much later Greek philosophical ideas about describing what God is like. God is all-knowing, etc. But here, God is like, yeah, I'm going to go and check this out in person, as if God is not all-knowing without doing the investigation. It's a curious, multifaceted sense of how one might have an encounter with God. And how about the literary freedom that this storyteller takes to presume to know and share God's own private thoughts, as we hear God say, I wonder, should I tell Abraham or should I not tell Abraham? I think I'll tell Abraham. What a wonderful freedom that the storyteller has, and then grants to us to imagine what it is to have such encounters with the Divine One. Now, there are some very core things that happen here to the identity of us as Jews and Christians who hold these stories as being important to who we are and who God is and what our relationship to God and one another in the world are. For instance, here Yahweh reiterates yet again that all the nations of the earth shall be blessed by Abraham and by his descendants. Just a reminder that that is our calling, that is our vocation, that is our raison d'etre in the world, is to be a blessing to the world. And we need to ask that question again and again to push ourselves. Does the world think that we're being a blessing to them? Do they encounter us as a blessing? Do Palestinians, women, Black and LGBTQ siblings say, hey, look at the church. They're a real blessing? Sometimes I hope yes. Far too often, I think they might feel the exact opposite. So if this is important to our core identity, we need to return to that. And beyond that, Yahweh here adds on to that, not just that Abraham and his offspring shall be a blessing, but also says, I have chosen Abraham that he may charge his children and his household after him to keep the way of Yahweh by doing righteousness and justice. That's how we bless the world, by doing righteousness. We might interpret that as integrity and justice. That's how we bless the world. That's our calling. That's what we're supposed to be about, is to live lives together as community of integrity and of justice in the world. Not to get rich or to lord it over others or think that we're better than others, but to bring integrity and justice into the world. And then Another core piece of this story is that Abraham calls Yahweh out for what he charges may be indiscriminate violence that Yahweh has planned. He challenges Yahweh to be Yahweh's own best self. He says, "Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" You're just, God. Be your best self. Be who you are. Do the best. And there are lots of times when folks, including Abraham himself a bit later in the story, neglect to question God's plans when we should. And that's an important thing for us to take away from this, that we are encouraged by this story to be in relationship with God, to be in conversation with God, not to be arrogant, but because Abraham here is clearly not arrogant. He's humble, and at the same time pushes and says, "Now, is this really what you have in mind? Is this really the best way to go about this? This doesn't seem to match the character of you, God, that we sense." And we need to engage in this sort of conversation, this questioning, this pushing, this wondering together, because blind obedience to any kind of authority lays the groundwork for authoritarianism to succeed. And I'm afraid that the church has set us up far too often for that just listen to the authority, listen to what usually a straight white man, by the way, because he knows best for you, and you shouldn't question. You should just listen to what he says and do that. But that's not what this story says. This story says that doesn't feel right. Can we examine this? Can we rethink this? It's also interesting that this story compares and contrasts with a couple of other stories in the Hebrew Scriptures. The folks in Sodom and Gomorrah are so evil that Yahweh plans to destroy the whole region, multiple cities, and with no reported warning to them that this is about to happen. And that contrasts with the later story of the prophet Jonah, whom God sends to the equally wicked city of Nineveh to warn them of their impending doom. And even though Jonah doesn't want his prophecy to succeed, his warning to succeed, in this story, as it's presented, the entire city of Nineveh listens to him, and they do repent of their ways, and God repents of what God had planned and does not destroy the city, which actually makes Jonah so furious he'd just as soon die than see Nineveh not be destroyed. And he resents that God is, as he says, a gracious and merciful God, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from punishment. That's a very different sort of relationship to a wicked city than what we have here. And by the way, if God had found 10 whole people who were decent enough in Sodom, and he did, as he says, forgive the whole place for the sake of those few, would Yahweh have done something else to stop the city's grave sin? Because otherwise, a whole lot of people are going to continue suffering at the hands of these wicked people. What's plan B? What's the alternative? What do you do to end the wickedness short of destroying? I think we should be really careful about this idea that, well, those people over there are wicked, so we should destroy all of them. That's really dangerous, especially in light of the world today and things that are going on. What would have been God's alternative plan to bring about repentance, renewal in these folks? Or is that it's an unfair question, because that's not part of this narrator's agenda. That's part of a different storyteller's agenda when they get around to Jonah. There's a second story that kind of compares and contrasts with this one, and it's the story that we had a little before this, the story of the great flood, when again there was general wickedness in the land, with only one family of decent folk. Back then it was Noah and his family. Here it's Abraham's nephew Lot and his family. And the idea is to rescue those few decent people out of harm's way while you destroy all of the rest. Then it was with flood, now it is with fire. And two of the rescued characters in this story will see the extent of the destruction, and they will interpret that their little band are the only survivors on Earth. So there is this intriguing connection, not a one-to-one, but there's certainly a lot of similarities between the two. Also, this story of Sodom and its destruction because of its wickedness, it's always important, but especially now when we're in Pride Month, to be very clear that the sin of Sodom is not homosexuality. Note that Yahweh has already heard of their wickedness, already has determined to destroy them before the episode that happens in chapter 9, right, or chapter 19, right after this. There's also no evidence whatsoever inside the Bible or outside that in this time and place, folks had a concept of innate same-sex attraction. Also, what happens in chapter 19 is not a story of loving same-sex partnerships, which God condemns, but rather of violent men intent on raping others. That is what is condemned, and what happens in this chapter 19 that follows what we just read. And many generations later, even in the collection of stories in the Bible, the prophet Ezekiel will be quoted. It's, Ezekiel chapter 16, verses 49 to 50, as saying to the people of Israel at that time, "This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughter," speaking of the city as an anthropomorphic person, "this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride," or arrogance, "excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. They were haughty and did abominable things like rape before me. Therefore, I removed them when I saw it." If we're going to look to the narratives of the Bible to condemn people, then we should be sure it's for what God actually is condemning people for. And if it points back at the things that we're doing or neglecting to do, then we should be honest about that. And if we are not aiding the poor and needy and not caring for them, but are seeking after ease and prosperity and excess all for our own selves, then we're the ones who are actually, if you will, the Sodomites. I'm not going to read aloud for you here, chapter 19. I invite you to read it for yourself, Genesis chapter 19. This weekend is Father's Day, and this is perhaps one of the worst possible narratives for Father's Day. I'll let you look out in on it for yourself. Just to note a couple of things about chapter 19. It is possible both to acknowledge that the cultural context and understandings of hospitality way back in this time, far long ago, in this place far, far away from us, very widely from our own sensibilities. We can acknowledge that, and also acknowledge at the same time that Lot's proposed solution to the violence that is threatened against his guests is barbaric in any circumstance. We just need to call that out. Also, a little weird piece that's in the story is about Lot's wife turning to salt if she looks back upon the city as they're escaping. The Greek myth about Orpheus, who's warned not to turn back and look at Eurydice as they are escaping Hades. If he looks back, he will lose her. So he knows better and looks back anyway. Poor Mrs. Lot, she's given no such warning here. It's just an odd little detail. Anyway, one of the core messages of this story is, if something seems to be out of line with the best nature that we expect of God and of God's people, or of any other authority, do not quietly submit to it, but call it out. Argue. Resist. I hope you know that you belong, and I hope that you stay curious.